So I thought that it would be good to start off with something more personal about my own life in Triratna. Um, but as I was preparing this talk, I realized that this talk had a lot in common with the Buddha's first teaching of the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which was the very first uh, talk he or teaching he gave after he became enlightened, and he did that in the deer park at Sarnath, which is in the northeast of India, just sort of south of Nepal, I think. Um, so this talk is really about how the Four Noble Truths have manifested in my own life. So the Four Noble Truths are, firstly, the truth of suffering. Secondly, the truth of the cause of suffering, which is craving. Thirdly, the truth of the end of suffering, which is enlightenment. And fourthly, the truth of the path towards the end of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path consists, I'll just tell you the 8 elements of that. Firstly, it's perfect vision. So that's the path of vision. And then the next 7 steps are the path of transformation. So firstly, there's the path of perfect vision. Secondly, perfect emotion. Thirdly, perfect speech. Fourthly, perfect action. Fifthly, perfect livelihood. 6 is perfect effort. 7 is perfect awareness or mindfulness, and 8 is perfect samadhi or perfect consciousness. And because of the time constraints we have that I have in giving this talk, because I really don't like the talks to go too much over 25 minutes, I'm not going to be able to talk about all of these things. But it doesn't mean that the parts that I don't talk about aren't important. They really are. It's just that for various reasons, I may not be able to include them in this particular talk. So the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. In my experience, people come to Triratna for 3 reasons. I mean, you might identify more, but the ones I've identified is people come firstly for stress relief, or secondly, because they're in a bad situation or have just come out of a bad situation, or thirdly, because they have a kind of existential angst. So they're searching for something. They're just their life. They know that there's something more in life, and they want to know what it is. Well, I came because of stress. I had this fabulous, exciting, rewarding job, but it was very, very stressful. And I needed to relieve that stress. Anyway, I was walking along near my job in the city, and I saw this handwritten sign in a window. This was before the days of these fancy posters and things you get, and so it was like a bit of torn off paper, really, and it said, "Would you like to learn to meditate?" In brackets, you don't have to be a Buddhist. I am so grateful for that little bit in brackets. You don't have to be a Buddhist, because I didn't want any of that mumbo jumbo spiritual stuff. I just wanted to feel better about myself. So these situations like stress or, a divorce or a serious illness or this sort of existential angst, they all involve suffering. So suffering isn't only those things. It's also when you stub your toe, or when you feel lonely, or when you're feeling ignored. All of those are forms of suffering. So it's a huge spectrum, suffering. And I was most definitely suffering. So I went along to this organisation, and I did an introductory meditation course, and then I went away for a while and I did an intermediate meditation course, and I began to go very sporadically to an evening in the city once a week. But then Triratna was then known as the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. The centre shifted to Coogee, and I live at Bondi, and I kind of had this feeling that the Dharma was following me around. And I thought, well, there has to be something in this. So I started to go very regularly to a Sangha night where, you'd meditate and then you'd have a tea break, and then there'd be a talk or some discussion. A little bit like we're doing actually now on Saturday mornings. Anyway, so on it went. Anyway, one day I woke up and the very first thing that came into my mind was, Cheryl, that's my birth name, Cheryl, you've become a Buddhist. How could this be? I mean, I was totally by accident. I hadn't intended to become a Buddhist. I just wanted to relieve my stress. But I knew that somehow I'd become a Buddhist. So going forth a little while into and touching on the second noble truth, the truth of the cause of suffering, which is craving. I was on this Christmas retreat for 5 days, a long time ago now. During the whole 5 days, I felt completely calm, completely grounded. I felt peaceful. I felt alert. I felt relaxed. I felt that my body was very lithe and very graceful. My emotions were mere nuances. So this went on for the whole 5 days, non-stop. In other words, I wasn't experiencing suffering. I wasn't experiencing dukkha. And when I spoke to Chittaprabha, who was the order member leading that retreat, she said to me, well, this is the way we all can naturally be. So I think that I had a glimpse of perfect vision just going into the Noble Eightfold Path, the first step being the perfect vision. So perfect vision, it's an initial spiritual insight or experience which, without any apparent preparation by you, nevertheless takes hold of you. So it's something very direct, and immediate. It's not at all theoretical. So, it could happen when you're out in nature. It could happen when you're immersed in music. It could happen even when you're walking along the street. You can have this glimpse of perfect vision. And it's as though your life is being lived at its highest level. But then, of course, it fades. So I felt that I had this experience of perfect vision. So what happened as a result of that? Well, the good thing that happened was that I asked to become a mitra, and that led on to other things, and now I'm an order member. But the second thing was I had the biggest dose of craving that you could possibly imagine. This was craving writ large. I knew what it was that I had experienced, and I knew it was something good. And I just wanted more and more and more of it. I was like this addict, like you get your first hit, I'm told, and that's superb. And then you spend all the rest of your time trying to achieve that same wondrous moment, and you never do. Well, I just went on and on and on with this craving. It was as though it was an object that I wanted to own and possess. So I was absolutely in craving. I was controlled by it. It was a verb. I was doing craving. But I lacked the depth of spiritual maturity and self-knowledge to assimilate any of this, or even to know what was going on. So I just kept doing it. But eventually I did come to my senses, because I was realizing I was still the quite shy person who didn't have much self-confidence and had difficulty making friends. And I felt like I hadn't made much Dharma progress. And I knew I had to change. So I knew, even though I had all those things that I thought were wrong with me, I knew that I had to change. I knew I had to alleviate the craving I felt. So, that was quite a useful lesson for me, if a rather painful lesson. So going on to the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. That's the total eradication of suffering. So it is in an enlightened state. For a long time, I wasn't very interested in that because enlightenment seemed so far away. And in fact, it still seems so far away. But I am more interested in it these days. But for a long time, I was much more interested in changing myself than exploring what it might mean to be enlightened. And we have this saying in Triratna that if we want to change spiritually, we first have to become happy and healthy human beings. So that was what I was trying to do for a long time. And of course, I'm not enlightened, so I'm still trying to do that. So just to visit one of the elements of the Noble Eightfold Path, perfect emotion. That's the second element in the Noble Eightfold Path. Well, I used to think that emotions were so juicy and they were the spice of life. And I thought that to control them took all the vitality out of life. But I now see that emotions aren't real. They're sensations and they're thoughts. But we give them power through craving and aversion. So we build up these emotions to more than they actually are. So these days I ask myself, well, why be full of frustration or anger or impatience? Why not be kinder or clearer or calmer? So I try to cultivate positive emotion rather than negative emotion. And certainly when I remind myself that I give more power to emotional states, particularly negative emotional states, than they need because they're just thoughts or sensations, there's a calmness and a clarity that can arise from that. And life just seems more regular somehow. And there's a kind of contentment that arises when I'm not obsessed with my emotions. And looking at perfect awareness, which is the seventh step of the Noble Eightfold Path. Over the past little while, I have looked at this in terms of the cessation of suffering, in terms of the third noble truth. And it has to do with appreciating that everything is impermanent, including myself, and that because it's impermanent, I can't grasp hold of it, thinking that it's real, because everything that's impermanent just changes, so it's never real and lasting. And, I know that because I do grasp hold of things, that that my failure to recognize the impermanent nature and the insubstantial and ingraspable nature of things leads me to suffering. So in terms of perfect awareness, which is, in terms of, perfect awareness, which is connected to the truth of the cessation of suffering, I think. First of all, becoming aware of my body. So I go on regular walks and just being aware of my body moving throughout space. Another thing that I do with my body is I use my hands like this. When I talk, I'm a person who uses her hands, and quite often I don't even know I'm doing it. So there's not much awareness there. But when I'm doing this now, I can feel this awareness, and I can feel my hands moving through space, slowly, deliberately, and I can feel, for example, the space between my fingers. It leads to a kind of more of a stillness, more of a groundedness, more of an awareness of actually what I'm doing with my body in connection with, for example, with my speech or with my thoughts. That's aligning, I think, with a moving away from craving and suffering into presence and being aware of what I'm doing in the actual moment. So continuing on with perfect awareness, I become aware of my feelings, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Trying my best not to go into the next steps of attaching emotions like pride or defensiveness or irritation or whatever it might happen to be. And again, there's this kind of grounding kind of effect. And I look at my thoughts and my moods, and I know they're not real either. So there's no need to be attached. And I look at my ideas and my thoughts and my conceptions, and I look at things like this water bottle, and letting those thoughts just pass along like clouds, not getting attached. So when I do this seventh element of the Noble Eightfold Path, on or off the cushion, I just seem to become more aware, more mindful, more sensitive to what's going on, more calm, more lucid, more of a sense of stillness, spaciousness. I seem to be kinder and have more compassion. So when I practice these things, I'm moving towards what it might be like to be enlightened, moving towards the third noble truth of the end of suffering, which is enlightenment. Even though I'm not there yet, I'm moving towards it, because these qualities that I've just spoken of are qualities of the enlightened mind. So the fifth stage of the Noble Eightfold Path, perfect the eighth stage, perfect samadhi or concentration. So it could be that one way of describing enlightenment is that it's, in terms of meditation, is that it's total meditative absorption. It's an ultimate connection with the empty nature of things, impermanent, insubstantial, ungraspable. But I just do my best through meditation. And meditation has always been a mainstay for me. And I'm not suggesting that I haven't had my ups and downs in meditation. I most certainly have. I've had periods where I fell asleep for a considerable length of time, periods where I felt I couldn't meditate, periods where every time I sat down to meditate, thoughts would just overtake me. One thing I do when that happens is, in meditation, I sit down, some enticing thought arises and I've gone down that path, bring myself back to my body. No sooner do I do that than another enticing thing has occurred. Bring myself back to my body and start the process again. It can seem so boring, and yet it's very useful in terms of being present and knowing that my mind is scattered and that there's a way that I can deal with that. So, meditation has been so valuable to me in showing me my current mind states and what I can do about them. So, with the mindfulness of breathing practice, at times I've had it's brought this sense of clarity and groundedness and focus. Doing the metta bhavana, where, you bring a sense of loving kindness to yourself, a good friend, a neutral person, a difficult person, and then you take it out to all sentient beings. I just love the metta practice. It's been so helpful to me because, yes, the first stage is about yourself, but all the other stages are other directed. So it's a way of diminishing obsession with the self and directing your energies and your kindness out to other people. So sometimes I do other kinds of meditation, which are to do with the cessation of self-view. Sometimes I just do just sitting and see what's happening. And sometimes I can be in a state of great calm and serenity and tranquility and spaciousness and openness, where I'm not there, at least for the time being. So again, although I could never claim to have the total meditative absorption of the enlightened mind, I know that I'm moving in the right direction. So I'm aware that I haven't touched on some aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. I've talked about perfect vision, perfect emotion, perfect awareness, and perfect samadhi or consciousness. I just wanted to say a little bit about perfect livelihood, just in relation to that job I had. Well, I gave up that high pressure, exciting job, and I downsized it to a much more modest job with absolutely no status whatsoever. And that involved quite a lot of humiliation. But oh boy, that humiliation was so good for me. So good. Um, I could go to this new job, and the second I walked out, I didn't even think about it till I came back the next day. So it gave me space in which to deepen my practice of the Dharma. And I haven't spoken about speech or perfect action, which is to do with ethics, because they're just such large topics, and I just don't have time to deal with them this morning. Likewise, perfect effort, which has also been very helpful for me. Part of perfect effort is looking at what we call the four exertions, and they are, firstly, preventing unskillful mental states from arising in the first place. Secondly, eradicating unskillful mental states that have arisen. Thirdly, developing skillful mental states. And fourthly, maintaining skillful mental states. So, Buddhism is full of lists, and I sometimes try and have a little fun and try and remember these things in my own mind through phenomes, sort of aide de memoire. So I say, preventing unskillful mental states arising is preventing. Eradicating unskillful mental states that have arisen is eagles. Developing skillful mental states is developing. And maintaining skillful states is measles. So I say, the four exertions, this is how I remember them. Preventing eagles from developing measles. That's what I say. And that helps me to remember. So just to reiterate the Four Noble Truths again, firstly, there's the truth of suffering. Secondly, there's the cause of suffering, which is craving. Thirdly, there's the way to the end of suffering, which is enlightenment. And fourthly, there's the path to the end of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, which is vision, emotion, speech, action, livelihood, effort, awareness, and samadhi. So I think I've finished what I had to say now, but I do have two questions for you in your groups. So the first question is, how do I know when I'm in the grip of craving? And how can I deal with it creatively? And secondly, which step or steps in the Noble Eightfold Path do I need to work on, and how can I do it? So I'll just say those again. Firstly, how do I know when I'm in the grip of craving, and how can I deal with it creatively? And secondly, which step or steps in the Noble Eightfold Path do I need to work on, and how can I do it? So is that clear to everybody? I think Suade's putting it up now. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I hope your discussion is worthwhile.